topic here is I have this shoe. I need to make it deform so that I can put a foot into it. So in the case of the shot that the student has here, they have a character who's standing up and they're trying to slip the shoe onto their foot with their hand. Now the problem here is that the foot is just cutting through the shoe. We need to be able to deform the shoe so that the heel can get into the foot and kind of get that cloth leather feeling of the shoe instead of just a solid piece of geometry. So how do we do that? Well, we have a few options. One, we could rig the shoe. We could do a full rig, do all the skin paint or weight painting, all of that stuff for in essentially what it in this shot is like 20 frames of animation. That's a lot of work. Rigging and skinning an object, even a simple prop like this, takes time. And if you don't know what you're doing, it is a frustrating experience. It's just not fun for just kind of, a little quick thing. It also isn't great if, for example, I want to have a character and I want to be able to deform their hand or their head or something like that. Maybe I want a really cartoony shot and someone's being smacked in the head and I want to kind of bend it around kind of Wile E. Coyote style and have him kind of just stand there with a big divot in his head or his arm, and he kind of pulls up the sign and you get the comedy. You can't really re-rig a rig like that because it's already rigged. So how can we deform these props or the rig quickly and easily and just get that one quick effect that we want? So, and yes, thank you for the sipping reminder. So, the first thing that we will want to use is a deformer. So in Maya, there's a ton of different deformers that we can use. These range from being able to bend things, warp things, kind of create soft effects. The deformers in Maya are really, really cool. In our case, because we want to be able to control the deformation very clearly, what I'll want to use is a lattice deformer. So, first thing, you're going to want to take your prop, if you're working with a prop, and typically I recommend doing what I'm doing here, have it in a new scene so that you can set everything up and then reference that into your shot. What this allows you to do is very quickly update the prop if something's not working, and it gives you a prop file, something that you can always reference back to if you need to. I don't try to do this in the actual animation file if I can avoid it, because then it kind of gets busy and hectic and things can go wrong. And if something goes wrong, it's harder to redo or fix something. If you're adjusting the rig itself, I'll do that usually in the animation file. It's easier that way. So I've got the shoe here. Let's add the lattice deformer. So I'm just going to go to deform with the shoe selected and hit lattice. And right away we get a lattice. Basically this grid that goes around the shoe and gives us all the deformation points. So just to show how it works, if I right click on the lattice, I can select lattice points. And with these, I can deform the shoe. So I can just kind of pull this and start deforming it however I want. Great. Now the first thing is the lattice points aren't in the correct position that we need in order to deform this shoe properly. We've got a lot of vertical deformation points, but no deformation points along the length of the shoe. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my lattice points right here. So once you create the lattice, you'll see the lattice shape there. Just change these points. That's a little high right there. So for example, in this case, I'll probably want U divisions. Yeah, so along the length here, let's add 4. I think that should be enough. It gives us a point right at the tongue of the shoe, one at the heel of the shoe, and one at the toes. So that's pretty good. I try to keep this as low as possible. The higher you go, the more crazy effects you can get. And then let's just keep this at super simple, just like this. Okay, So with these lattice points, I now have 2 points here that I can use to adjust the heel and bend the heel around if I want to. I can adjust this point of the shoe. That actually lines up pretty well. So now you can see I can start deforming the shoe. Great. Wow. So easy. Except there's a couple of things that are going to make this a nightmare to work with. First of all, when you're animating lattice points, so I could take these and I could set a key and animate these. You cannot reset them, at least not very easily. As you can see, if I select this lattice point, there's no channel box here. It's not like a prop where I select the shoe and I can adjust the translates, rotates, scale, all of that. These are components, so same thing as vertices, edges, faces. They don't have components like a normal object. You can technically find them here, but you can see it's just a bunch of random values on all of these, which means that it's going to be impossible to reset once we change this. So if I do this and then do a whole bunch of other things, how do I set that back to where it used to be? There's no way to reset that. So unless you're very careful and you start keying it right away and make sure you're holding poses, you're going to just destroy the deformation and never be able to go back to it, which sucks. Okay. Issue number 2. If I take my lattice points and let's move this up here, and then let's move our shoe because, well, of course we want to animate it. Look at that. The lattice doesn't go with it. And then as the shoe goes through the lattice, we get this weird deformation, which is actually pretty cool for certain things because you could have an object go through a lattice and create a simple animation like a fish swimming through the water just by creating this wave. That could work, but in our case, that's not going to be great. This is going to be a pain to deal with. So, how do we do this? How do we solve this? Well, first let's get the lattice to follow the shoe. That's going to be the big one here, because if we don't solve that, there's no point in getting anything else done. So the way I typically do this is just take the 2 lattice objects here, the lattice itself and the base, and I'll group them, and I'll just call this, let's call this lattice. And then I'm going to constrain that to the shoe. So select the shoe, then the lattice group, and I'm going to go to constrain parent. Now, if I move the shoe, the lattice goes with. Yay! That's one thing done, which means that if I now adjust my lattice points, for example, and move the shoe, it's all moving together. Great. Now, if you're doing this on a rig, you would constrain it to whatever control is controlling the main deformation. So, for example, if I'm deforming the head, I would want to constrain to the head control. If I'm deforming the hand, I'd constrain it to the hand control, etc. Okay, great. Now what? Well, problem 2. We can't key these points easily. We are always going to be fighting to reset this lattice at any point that we animated, which is a nightmare. How do we improve that? Well, we can use another deformer in Maya. This deformer is called a cluster. Now, a cluster is basically, you can almost imagine it like a selection set. So in Maya, there's things called selection sets where, for example, I could take my shoe here, go to create sets, quick select set, and I'll call this shoe, and hit OK. And let me actually do that again properly. Sets, quick select set, shoe. I'm going to add it to my shelf right there. So now I have this quick select set. If ever I need to select my shoe, I just go click. There we go. I've got the shoe selected. It's just a way to quickly select things. Clusters are similar, except that they work for objects and components. So, for example, I could take a lattice point right here, go to deform, cluster, and that creates a cluster point, which is basically something I can select, and you can see it's got attributes, translates, rotates, scale. And when I move it, it's moving that specific lattice point. So I'm creating a new control for that specific point. This works with faces, edges, vertices, anything really. Clusters are really, really fun. So I can do that for each individual point, or depending on how I want to animate this, I can select groups of points. So for example, I could create a lattice right here. So deform cluster, sorry, take my lattice points and create a cluster for them. And now this cluster will control both points. So not only can I move it around, I can actually scale it in and out, and I can also rotate that whole back end of the shoe very easily. If I want to have a little bit more control here, select those lattice points. I'm just going to hit G to repeat the last command, which is create cluster. So now I have a cluster there that I can control. And I can just do as many as I want. So for example, maybe I want to be able to control the heel a little bit. I'll add a cluster there. And then, do I need one there? Maybe. Just as the toes go in, so we can animate this kind of moving up and down. There we go. We have clusters. Now these allow us to actually animate this lattice. And if ever I get some weird funky rotation or whatever, I can just go in here, zero that out. Shoe is back to normal. Yay! We're actually able to animate this. So great. We've got our lattice that follows the shoe now, and our clusters that allow us to control the lattice. Honestly, at this point, this is pretty much done. I could just work with this and I'm good. There is a issue though. It's not a huge issue, but it's more of a workflow issue. And that is that as I move the shoe, the lattice goes with, but the clusters stay behind. They don't move with the main object. So is this a problem? No, because they're still attached and still control the object regardless. So I could take this cluster and move it around, and you can see it still controls that back of the shoe. Great. So if I wanted to, I could just leave those there, animate them as the shoe is moving through the scene, and I'm good. As an animator, I don't like this though, because this basically means that as I'm animating, the shoe could be like way over here, and oh shoot, I need to animate the shoe. Okay, go back to the clusters. Wait, I can't see the shoe. Ugh, go back and forth, back and forth. It's a pain. So let's see. This way we can fix first problem 2. Now we can get back to the main positions. Yeah, exactly. So is there a way to stick the clusters? No. The reason that there's no way to stick the clusters to the main shoe easily is that when you move the clusters, let's say I take the clusters and the shoe itself and move them, I get this. Wherever the clusters go, they're translating and affecting the lattice. So if they move, so is the object. It's going to deform. So there's no way to really attach, at least not easily, to attach the clusters directly to the object. Not only that, but there's also a slightly smaller issue, which is clusters are a pain to try and select at times. So you can see, if I'm trying to animate this, those clusters they're kind of small compared to normal animation controls, which could be much bigger, much more easy to select. So, how do we get this to work? Well, what we can do is create controls that control the clusters. So let me show you how I would do this. First of all, I'm going to take my clusters. Let's just group them. And I'm going to just call this clusters. This just keeps things organized. And let's start creating some controls that we can use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to create, NURBS primitives, and I'm going to create a circle. And I'm just going to shape this. This is going to be my layout control. This is going to be the main control that moves the whole shoe. I don't like to animate props by the geometry. This is just a personal preference. I really don't like it because it means that I have to have other geometry selectable, and I'm not a fan. I would much rather just have everything on control curves or locators. So this is going to be my root control, main control. You can name them whatever you want. I like to use the name root. Okay, so root control, once I've got it in place, I'm going to go to modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type history. This just makes sure that there's no construction history, nothing that can go wrong with it. And with this, I want it to control the shoe. So the easiest way to do this is I'm just going to constrain the geometry of the shoe to the root control. So root control, shoe, constrain parent. There we go. Now if I select that and move it around, that's my control for the shoe. Great. First part done. Now I need controls for the different clusters. So once again, I'm going to go to NURBS primitives. Let's do a circle. And let's see, maybe a little bit bigger than this, like that. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Honestly, you can set these however you want. And I'm just going to place it right where the cluster is. Now, just to make this a little easier, because the lattice is in the way right now, we don't really need to see the lattice anymore. Honestly, it's just there following the shoe. I'm just going to take my lattice group and turn off the visibility. This is just going to make it easier to see the clusters. I'm going to take this NURB circle and I'm going to snap it to our first cluster. So, boop, right there. Now the way I snapped it was I just held down the V key, V as in Victor, and with the middle kind of manipulator selected, hold down V, middle mouse click and drag on that cluster, it'll snap right to it. There we go. So this is going to be our heel control. Okay. Now with this, I can take this and I'll just duplicate it, and let's snap that to the next cluster. So this is going to be the, let's say, heel top control. So like that. And we keep going. So duplicate, snap. This is going to be the tongue control. So the tongue of the shoe. And don't need that one at the end there. Okay. Duplicate that. And then this is going to be toe control. Again, you would just name these whatever you want. I highly recommend you name them or else it gets very confusing. Okay. So we've got all of these in place. Now, honestly, you can put them wherever. If I want the toe control to be a little bit closer to the toes, I could do that. The exact position doesn't really matter. So I've got all of these in place. Next thing I'm going to do, just select all of these, modify freeze transformations, that resets all of their attributes right in there. Edit, delete by type history, just gets rid of any history that might be in there. And then I'm going to parent them to my root control right there. So what this means is now if I move my root control, they all move along and I can animate these separately. Yay. That's pretty much it. Okay. Now what? Well, now I just need the smaller controls that I've created to control my clusters. There's a lot of different ways we could do that. You could constrain them, you could do all sorts of things to link them together. For me personally, because it's just a direct link, I want whatever I do to this control to just go directly to my cluster. What I can do is use the connection editor. So go to Windows, General Editor, Connection Editor. And what this basically does is it creates a connection from one attribute to another. So that when I adjust my, for example, translate Y on this control, that value is going to also go to the whatever value I want on the cluster. So to use this, you just need to load in both objects. So I'm going to take my control, I'm going to load that on the left, take the cluster, load that on the right. You can see heel cluster. And then I want to double check this direction here. So I want to connect from the heel to the cluster. If you have it backwards, it's going to do the opposite way. So in this case, I want from here to there. Okay. With this, I'm just going to find my translates, rotates, and scale. So just scroll down the list. There's translate, rotate, scale. Scroll down here. Translate, rotate, scale. So I'm just going to select translate. I'm going to connect it to translate, like so. I'll select rotate, and I'll connect that to rotate. Scale to scale. And you can see how on the cluster it's turning yellow. That shows that it's connected. So basically what that means is when I move this control now, it's moving the cluster. Whatever values I put onto this control now move the cluster. I can do that for all of these. So very quickly, just go through here, rotate to rotate, scale to scale, translate to translate, load left, make sure I don't have the cluster, load right, doot, 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 there we go, load left, load right, translate, rotate, scale, there we go, everything's connected. I can double check, yep, it's moving, great. Now what does that do? Well, the clusters can't really move with the shoe, or else it creates double transformations. But these controls can, as you can see here. The controls follow along with the shoe, and their values stay zeroed out because they're just parented. So I can move these around wherever I want. And because these also control the position of the original clusters, I can move them, and it feels like I'm using the control to deform the shoe, whereas the control is controlling the cluster, which is deforming the shoe. I'm just adding an extra layer in here. With that, I can just take all my clusters, turn off the visibility, and no one will be the wiser. Now I can move my shoe wherever I want, and I have full control on my deformations. And I can just key these however I want. Scale it up, I can do whatever. And it all follows along. So, with that, that's pretty much it. At this point, all I would want to do, this is more for my sake, is clean up my graph editor here. Or sorry, not my graph editor, my outliner. So right now I've got all of these kind of layers in here. I would just want to go in here and take all of this, group it together, and I'll just call this shoe, let's call it rig, shoe rig. There we go. I've got my shoe rig. Last thing I can do is I'm going to take my shoe geometry as well as my lattice and clusters. I'm going to group all of those together, call this shoe geo. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I can take this group, go to my attribute editor, and under display drawing overrides, I'm just going to enable override and set that to referenced. What this does is it makes it so that I cannot, in my viewport, select any of those objects. So even if the clusters were visible, I cannot select the clusters, and I cannot select the shoe geometry. This is basically a just in case. Those shouldn't be animated. I should only be animating my main controls anyway. So by doing this, I just ensure that nothing's going to get weird and offset. So with this, I now have my shoe rig ready to animate. And this would work on any type of prop and any rig. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's see, there were a few questions here. So do I use the connection editor to control the scaling? Yes. So that's exactly what I showed there, using the connection editor to control the clusters with the actual controls instead of the cluster itself. Tara, thank you for the reminder. Is there a way to get the lattice to line up with the existing pose? So when you create the lattice, it will conform to the pose or whatever you have selected. So for example, if I have a sphere here, and then let's do a duplicate there, the lattice will conform to all of those. So I do a lattice, it'll go around both. Now, if you've got the shoe already rotated and kind of in place, you just want to reset the position of the shoe so it's straight and flat, and then you create the lattice and it'll line up to the shoe. The lattice is always created lined up to the world, so straight up and down, left to right, in and out from the world. So you always want to line up your objects to that. This is why I recommend creating your own prop file if possible, or just if it's on a rig, let's say you have the head and it's at this angle here and you want to create a lattice deformer for it, just zero out the head so that it's facing straight to camera and everything's parallel. Create the lattice, then put the head back into position, and then it'll line up with the head. Let's see. So you can't set up a chained deformation with clusters. It's only for local on-place modifications. Let's see, like a cloak, for example. Cluster, it would work. So it would depend on how you want to set it up, but you could use clusters. Basically, clusters are just ways of controlling multiple selections. So multiple vertices, or even just one vertice, edges, faces. So it would really just depend on how you want to set them up and how you want them to follow along with the object. For something like a cloak, what I would end up doing is probably having certain clusters parented under each other. So let's create a simple plane here for now. Okay, and we'll just lower the amount of detail on this thing. So let's go with 3. Okay, so I'm going to create a lattice. So deform lattice. And actually, just so we can see it a little bit better, I'm going to create a cube. Because actually, no, I should be able to do that with this. So I won't even need a lattice deformer, honestly. Okay, so we've got this. Now, I want to be able to control all of these vertices together so that I can create kind of a cloak effect. So I'll take all of these, go to deform cluster. So that's going to control that first edge of faces, or sorry, edge of vertices. Vertices here, cluster, 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 like that. So if I move this now, I can start controlling each one independently. Great. But they don't move together. You can see how if I move the first one, let's say that's the top of the cloak, nothing else moves with it. Now, I could select them all, and that moves them all together. So like that. And if I group them, so put one cluster under the other, you can see that they follow along. So I can just create a hierarchy here. And now I can move this one, lower that one, kind of like this, and quickly create a cloak. So something like that. Now, for something like this, it really depends on what you're going for. Clusters can work really well. Joints could also work pretty well for something like this. So, yeah, they can work very well. Clusters are super versatile. The main thing is that because I was using a lattice deformer, a lattice is already following the main object, and because the clusters are not following the shoe, they're following the lattice, that's what's causing the main issue. That's really why I needed these extra controls. Now, there's different ways you can handle it. I like the control method because it gets me the extra controls I'm going to add in anyway, so might as well keep it simple. Let's see, are the clusters hidden automatically? I hide them. So that's why on this shoe, I actually added them into a group right there, and I just turned off the visibility. That way I can just turn them off. I don't need to see them. And we're good to go. Let's see. So I would have to break everything apart and start from scratch. Well, if for example, the shoe, you would just need to reset it down to the floor and then create the lattice and then put it back into place. So if it's constrained, just turn off the constraint, put it on the ground, create the lattice, turn the constraint back on. It should be back in place. Or the way I would approach this is I would make a new shoe prop on its own file, and then just replace the old shoe with the new one. So copy the animation from the old shoe onto the new shoe, and then you should be good to go. And then everything else just kind of line it back up. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And we can go all out with this. I kept it pretty simple, where we just have some quick deformation here at the main points. You could add one on the shoe. You could make the lattice more in depth. So for example, I only have these kind of 2 points there and there. You could add another point in the middle so you have more control for the squash and stretch of the shoe. There's all sorts of things you could do. I like to keep lattices simple, because the more you go complex with them, the more you get kind of weird deformations or sharp deformations, which tends to not look so good, especially when you're doing it on an organic creature or person or something like that.